All right, let's talk about one of the greatest underdog stories in all of history, the American Revolution. This is so much more than just a war. It's the story of how a completely new kind of nation was dreamed up and then fought for against all odds.
I mean, think about it for a second. How on earth did a handful of colonies, with a seriously divided population and a pretty ragtag army, manage to go up against a British Empire? We're talking about the global superpower of its day. And then, as if that wasn't enough, how did they turn around and invent a new form of government, literally from scratch? That's the question we're going to dig into.
So, where does this all start? Well, it wasn't with some big, sudden explosion. It started with a relationship that was about to go sour fast. For a long time, the colonies and Britain had a system that worked, but that was all about to change.
For decades, Britain had this policy called salutary neglect. It's just a fancy term for being hands-off. You know, they let the colonies pretty much run their own show. But then came the 7 Years' War, a massive global war with France that left Britain with a mountain of debt. So they looked across the Atlantic at the colonies, saw they were doing pretty well, and thought, aha, there's our solution. The hands-off era, yeah, that was over.
And this wasn't some slow, subtle shift. Nope. It was like a series of rapid-fire shocks to the system. First, in 1763, Britain draws a line on a map and tells colonists, you can't settle past here. Then come the taxes, one after another. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act on literally all paper goods. And the final straw for many, the Intolerable Acts, which basically put Massachusetts under military control. You can just feel the pressure building, right?
But this wasn't just about money, you know? It was about a huge fundamental idea, one that was bubbling up from the Enlightenment. The colonists truly believed that a government had no right to tax its citizens if those citizens didn't have a voice, a representative in that government. And since they had 0 seats in the British Parliament, these taxes felt like tyranny. This slogan, no taxation without representation, it wasn't just catchy, it was the moral core of their argument.
So protests are boiling over, turning into actual armed conflict. And now, the colonists are facing this just monumental task. How do you win a war against the most powerful military on the planet? The odds were, let's be honest, absolutely terrible.
Now, the first thing you got to understand is that this was not some unified movement where everyone was on the same page, not even close. Fewer than half the colonists were actually patriots who wanted independence. A huge chunk, maybe 30%, were just trying to stay out of it, and a solid 20% were loyalists who wanted to stay part of the British Empire. So the patriots weren't just fighting the British, they were also trying to convince their own neighbors.
George Washington looked at his ragtag army and then at the polished, professional British forces, and he knew a straight-up fight was basically a death sentence. So he came up with this brilliant, simple, 3-part game plan. Step 1, just survive. Outlast them. Make the war long and expensive until Britain just gets tired of it all. Step 2, get help. They couldn't do it alone, so they had to find a powerful ally. And step 3, wait for the perfect moment to team up and land one decisive knockout blow.
And this is where step 2 of the playbook kicks in. The Battle of Saratoga in 1777, what a game changer. The Americans win this shocking, decisive victory, and over in Paris, Benjamin Franklin uses this news perfectly. He convinces France, who is just itching for a little revenge against Britain, to jump into the war on America's side. Before you know it, Spain and the Netherlands join in too, and suddenly, Britain's little colonial problem has become a massive, expensive world war.
And that brings us to step 3, the knockout blow. It all came together perfectly at Yorktown in 1781. You had Washington's army and French troops trapping the main British army on land, while the French Navy sailed in and blocked any chance of an escape by sea. It was a perfect trap. The British army had no choice but to surrender, and that was pretty much the end of the war. Independence was won.
Okay, so you'd think the hard part was over, right? Winning the war? Nope. Now came an even bigger challenge, actually building a country. The fighting was done, but now the arguments were just beginning.
So, who were the guys in the room drawing up the blueprint for this new country? Well, let's be clear. It was a very specific group of people. They were all white, all male, mostly college-educated, and on average, way wealthier than the typical American. We're talking about the new nation's elite, led by heavyweights like George Washington, the elder statesman Benjamin Franklin, and the absolute political genius, James Madison.
And the whole thing nearly imploded right out of the gate over one massive question: how should the people be represented?
The big states, like Virginia, said, simple, the more people a state has, the more votes it gets. But the small states, like Delaware, were terrified. They said, no way, you'll just steamroll us. Every state should get the exact same vote. It was a total deadlock, and it threatened to end the whole project.
And the solution they came up with, honestly, it was pretty brilliant. It's called the Great Compromise. They decided to create a Congress with two parts, or two houses. First, the House of Representatives, where representation would be based on population. That made the big states happy. But then there's the Senate, where every single state gets 2 votes, no matter its size. That protected the small states. It was the deal that saved the Constitution.
But solving that problem immediately created another one. And this one was much, much darker. If the number of representatives is based on population, what do you do about the hundreds of thousands of enslaved people? How do you count them? The answer they landed on was this single infamous fraction.
They called it the 3/5 compromise. It was a cold political bargain. For the purpose of counting population to decide representation, every 5 enslaved people would be counted as 3 individuals. Now let's be crystal clear. This had nothing to do with humanity. It was all about power. It gave the southern slave states way more seats in Congress and more political power than they would have otherwise had, and it wrote the institution of slavery directly into the country's founding DNA.
So, they've got the document, but the story's far from over. The Constitution provided a new framework for the country, but it also baked in some deep, deep contradictions that would haunt the nation for generations.
Okay, so you've written the Constitution. Now you got to sell it to the states. And that was a huge fight. On one side, you had the Federalists. They were all for it, arguing the country needed a strong central government to survive. But on the other side were the Anti-Federalists, and they were deeply skeptical. They were afraid that they had just fought a war to get rid of one powerful, tyrannical government, only to create a brand new one. So what was the compromise? What finally got everyone on board? Well, the win over the Anti-Federalists, the Federalists made a crucial promise. Ratify the Constitution, they said, and the very first thing we will do is add a Bill of Rights, a list of 10 amendments to guarantee individual freedoms, like freedom of speech and religion. That promise was the final piece of the puzzle. As George Washington stepped down from the presidency, he left the young country with some final words of warning, basically 4 big pieces of advice. 1. Stay out of Europe's constant drama. 2. Don't get tangled up in permanent alliances with other countries. 3. Try really, really hard not to form political parties because they'll just divide you. And 4. Don't let your loyalty to your state or your region become more important than your loyalty to the country as a whole. It was advice that, well, America has struggled with ever since. And this really brings us to the painful, central contradiction of the entire American Revolution. This new nation was built on the incredible, radical idea that all men are created equal and have a right to liberty. And yet, at the very same time, the country's laws and its economy protected and depended on the institution of human slavery. It's a contradiction that was there from day one. You know, for a little while there, some people thought slavery might just fade away on its own. But in 1793, a single invention changed everything: the cotton gin. Suddenly, processing cotton became incredibly easy and ridiculously profitable. The demand for cotton exploded around the world, and to meet that demand, the demand for enslaved labor in the American South went through the roof. This one machine didn't just preserve slavery, it made it more powerful and more entrenched than ever before.
And that leaves us with a powerful question, one that echoes all the way to today. The founders created this incredible experiment in liberty and self-government, but they failed to resolve the hypocrisy of building that nation on a foundation of slavery. What is the legacy of that contradiction? Thinking about that question is absolutely essential to understanding the American story, both then and now.